So we have a special Voice of San Diego podcast this week. This one is in addition to the normal show. I wanted to bring in Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher and Nathan Fletcher, gotta be the most powerful political couple, I guess, now that Nathan has won the seat in the County Board of Supervisors. He'll be taking that job in a couple of days. Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher, of course, is the head of the Appropriations Committee of the Assembly and one of the most powerful state legislators in the state. And, having them both in here, we were able to talk about some personal issues and some of how they started as a relationship and also just some of their perspective now as they kind of take this next step in their leadership of the local Democratic Party, and is it really them in charge, or are they just a couple of interesting people, and are they going to run for mayor, anything like that? So a lot to talk about. It went pretty long, but I think it's pretty worth it. So hope to hear what you think. All right, I am joined, the Great Voice San Diego podcast studio, by Lorena Gonzalez Fletcher and Nathan Fletcher. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're doing this.
We're doing it.
We're here.
We had the opportunity to bring both of them in and talk about a lot of things going on in the world. They seem to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, it does feel like you guys are at the center of San Diego Democratic politics right now. Power couple, if you were, things like that. Let's try to boil it all off and have a good conversation about what your plans are, how you got here, and stuff like that. So
perfect.
Let's start first of all with, how did you guys meet first? Do you remember? Everybody has a couple's first meeting story. How was that? And
she was trying to kill some legislation I was doing.
What was that?
That's not the first time we met.
No, it's not the first time we met. It was the
first time we met.
We had fierce interaction and I beat you.
Okay, that's not true. I don't think you want that story. The first time we met, interestingly, was after a State of the City address, and I think I was head of labor, and people had said, oh, there's this moderate guy, you should meet him. He's in the assembly, he's going to be a rock star. And I was like, okay. And so finally, I think he walked right up to me. And for some reason, I think he got nervous because he had heard bad rumors about how mean I was. And so he worked slayed people really hard to impress me.
It was going to kill me.
And he was telling me the story.
No, somebody else was there. Okay, so if you go back, there was a bridge jumper in Sacramento who was going to jump the bridge, and we climbed down on the edge, and you were talking to someone, and somebody who did that, and I was like, we'll just share this thing that just happened.
Yeah, so you broke that out as a story to tell her. That's
awesome. No, it was prompted by a third party. There was a third party who was there who kind of prompted oh my, I just heard this story. And I was there I was on the edge of the bridge.
And so I just thought, oh my God, who is this guy? He's clearly embellishing this awesome story.
No, it wasn't embellished. That's true. That's true.
She's still relating her own truth.
To convince me that he's a good guy, right? Uh-huh. I'm such a good guy. And so that was it. And I think I stood there with my hands folded, probably giving him an odd look, okay.
A little icy stare. A little cold. And
what I found out at that moment, which is something that I think people find out, is Nathan loves a challenge. And so he's like, this woman is not going to be so mean to me. And so he tried to schedule lunch a few times. I think he was already trying to think about running for mayor, and we kept putting it off. And then finally went to lunch. Nathan and Evan and I think Evan McLaughlin, he was my political director, and
you needed a chaperone.
Oh, I totally was like, I don't know, this is a strange one. But he was absolutely smart and charming and well-versed on a lot of things, and didn't tell any more hero stories for that lunch. So it was
didn't prompt any.
A good lunch. And then after that, we had a run-in over a piece of legislation.
What was that?
It was all the things we don't want to talk about on this show.
It was affectionately known as the Midnight Deal.
Oh, no.
That one. That was back when we were in the era of San Diego of bold, big things were bad.
So I caught wind. Somebody had called me. It was
a little bit before you did.
Late that evening.
Before me?
Yeah.
Somebody called me about legislation he was doing to remove the cap on redevelopment. I decided that I would kill this legislation. So
How'd
I
that go?
called the speaker, John Perez at the time, and he told me, that was back when they needed
You
a
were
two-thirds.
here or in Sacramento?
I was here. I was in San Diego, just
Yeah.
following it, and like this wasn't going to be a good thing necessarily for labor. So I said, this is just premature, and we need to kill this. And he informed me that Nathan, in fact, was the one vote that would get the budget over, and so he's probably gonna get what he needs. And so he suggested I either work on senators or work on Nathan to get what I needed out of that piece of legislation. So I think I probably called him. We probably talked like 7 or 8 times that night, back and forth.
So percentage of profanity declined each call.
Really? You
Yeah.
called yelling?
Oh, I always
I've
started.
never heard that you were involved in that. That's interesting.
Well, I ended up supporting it by probably around 3 a.m.
So it wasn't a midnight deal. It started
Yeah.
like 4 or 5, and then we went
I'm
through
aware of
the
how late
night,
it was.
and
Yeah.
then didn't actually get done until
Yeah.
the next morning.
We got a number of concessions, not from Nathan, but from then Mayor Jerry Sanders and Fred.
Mass?
Yeah.
It
So
worked out.
what they promised you that labor would be part of negotiations about it and such?
That we would, any large expenditure of funds downtown in the redevelopment area, that we would have labor peace.
Fascinating. And then at that point, you gave him the green light to do it? Or
Well, he was
not that
already
you-
doing it.
I was
getting rolled.
moving. I was encouraging them, like, you should take care of
they just
her.
wanted you to stop trying to kill it.
Yes, and in fact, I would like to believe we had the votes to kill it in the Senate. I made phone calls. In fact, after that, it went over to the Senate probably at 5 a.m. I think that was an all-nighter, and I made calls to make sure it passed the Senate at that point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating.
Yep.
And what was your opinion of him worse after that night?
No, I think at first it was actually better. I actually admired, there were a couple things, and I think that was the first afterwards, because we decided we were exhausted. We had talked so many times, yelled, screamed. I yelled and screamed. He didn't, of course.
I'm the calm one.
And then figured out a solution. And afterwards, I think we probably went to lunch after that or something a few weeks later. And we did recognize that I had a lot of respect for him, because I realized, number one, he's a hard worker, very hard. He was working his bill. He was working with members. I couldn't catch up, which was frustrating to me, because I'm pretty good at like being able to pass or kill things. Even when I was a labor leader, I kind of understood how to do this, and I just couldn't catch up. So I knew he was working his bill the entire night. I think he was impressed that I stayed on this and stayed up all night. And, I'm having phone calls with members of the mayor's staff and trying to go into the office and get, things in writing and just trying to get deals done. And so we talked a lot. We have a very similar work ethic. We really, I'm much more emotional than he is, but I think he kind of is patient enough to deal with that and get to a point where, and both of us are trying to get to a yes, and I think a lot of people don't see that it's a constant, like, we want this to work for the most amount of people possible. So we had a mutual respect after that, and we just became really good friends.
And then she opposed me in the mayor's race.
Yes, I remember that.
And then called me, like, I don't know, a few weeks before the election, when they're in the middle of opposing me. Asked to help on a janitor's issue.
Yes. So let's talk about, I remember there was something your daughter had donated to his campaign, right?
Yes, Tiara,
yes.
the smart one in the family.
Oh,
Whoa.
Yeah. She knew. She was like,
Like,
hey,
I'm
this
not
is the
smart?
best candidate. No, you're very smart.
Okay.
She had a little better judgment in that race. I think history would bear out that, Tiara was on the ball there.
Yeah, Tiara, I think she had a front seat in understanding that I knew Nathan. I really respected him. I thought he had good values. He had a good work ethic. He'd make a great mayor. But the reality is I was leading an organization that was 100% behind another candidate.
Mm-hmm.
And so Tiara, being like, in her teens and wanting to kind of stand up for herself, decided she was going to go ahead and make her own decisions. Didn't tell me. Donated. And
She told me.
then I got to see it in the reports.
Yeah.
Actually, when a reporter
Actually, we got
called
to
me.
see it in the paper.
Yeah, that's
And
where I got to see it.
yeah, I remember
Yeah.
that Doug
Yeah.
Manchester's UT made a big deal out of that. So
Yes.
it was some sort of sign of, you were double crossing your candidate or something like
As
that.
opposed to being
Yeah.
a defiant teenager.
Yeah,
Yeah.
apparently nobody's ever had teenagers who...
Yeah, she made a big point about it. She's like, look, I made money
Yeah.
I'm going to do what I want with it.
Yes, it's a constant situation we still live with in our lives now. She's 22, and
although I think she's out of money now. She seems to take more money than she does now. But,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so at what point did you get a spark?
Well, we were just friends for a long time, and then Nathan was separated and started going through a divorce, and even during that time we were good friends, and a lot of our interaction was based on our kids, and I always like to tell the truth, which is I think Nathan was, a single dad and had his kids half time, and he'd call and say do you know how to make a hot dog? And I'd literally be like, okay, there are 3 ways you can cook a hot dog. This will be the easiest, and this will taste the best, So a lot of food questions, and a lot of basic, things that I think he thought, well, the mom will know. And so we went through a lot of that. And then I think it just became natural after being friends, and we realized there was a spark there, and I think slowly tiptoed into dating.
How'd you do that?
Go ahead.
Just kind of happened over time.
I think we went to dinner.
It was one of those things where when you have someone who you've been professional friends with, you've been at times politically aligned, at times opposite each other, but you develop that respect and admiration. And one of the things that's always drawn me so much to Lorena is it's not just the intelligence. You have someone who is severely dyslexic, who went to Stanford, Georgetown, UCLA law, passed the bar, brilliant. Just absolute brilliant. But I've always appreciated she just goes for it. Just fights. Is just fearless. And that's something that is it went from a point of great respect for that approach. Maybe it started with great fear of that approach, and then it morphed into kind of a respect and then an admiration. And now it's something that I just think is it's just amazing. So many times people come up and they're just like, oh, your wife, she's so much. And I'm like, it's hot, isn't it? It's freaking hot, man. I love it. She just goes for it. And so it was just one of those things where, you have a professional relationship, becomes a genuine friendship, and then it evolves into something else. And, I would say, life goes in ups and downs and twists and turns, but, every now and then it works out, and it works out in an incredibly beautiful and great way. And now we have this incredible marriage and love and partnership. And then we also have shared interests, both things we do with our kids and going camping and things we just like to do, along with our professional activities. And so to have a genuine partner and friend in all aspects of that is just really, really a great thing.
Mm-hmm. You knew when you started dating that it was going to be a big deal. And I remember, I think you announced it on Twitter.
Well, let me tell you, we'd been dating for a few months. That wasn't new. But how do you tell people? I guess we could have changed our Facebook status or something. That seemed a little juvenile. And we realized that people were seeing us out. We were going out to dinner. I brought Nathan to a fundraiser, but we weren't all over each other or something, but we were out in public a lot. And so we knew that people saw, and in fact, there was one instance in particular, I got a phone call from a media station that said, well, we saw that you guys were at pool side of the Hilton, and we were with Tierra.
Really? There was a reporter?
Yes. And I was like, can you just hold off? We'll figure out a good way to say this. It's this isn't, it felt like TMZ, right? Oh, you guys, but we were dating. We knew we were dating. People close to us knew we were dating. But how do you say that, right? When you realize this is going to be of interest. So we decided that we knew we were going out for my birthday, and it'd be easy to say I spent my birthday this way. And so we said, okay, we'll just post a picture on my birthday. It won't be that big of a deal.
Yeah, it was.
There were news stories about that.
Yeah. It's a slow news day. It's a slow news day. I don't know.
My cousins in particular think that's hilarious. They're like, when my cousin goes on a date, she gets a NBC top story. I was like, oh gosh.
Well, it's a tough, as somebody on the media side, it's an interesting calculation. We have a little bit of a removal from it because we so focus on politics and public affairs and such, but it is also a political story. I mean, your partnership is a political phenomenon now, in a sense. You both work together. There's power in that partnership, just as any couple has benefit of their spouse. So there have been a lot of people that have taken that as some sort of opportunism or something. And how would you like to make sure that was characterized?
Well, I think if you look at the things that we try to do professionally, right? I mean, it's not. I mean, politics is not as self-aggrandizing as people think. I mean, a lot of times it's incredibly degrading and frustrating and difficult. But ultimately, we're not going to benefit from the actions that we take. If I'm successful at the Board of Supervisors, what does that mean? Well, that means some foster kids hopefully get a better environment. That means some folks get mental health services. And I think when you look at what we're trying to do, and what she's doing, farm workers are going to get paid a little bit more. And I think that we both come into this with a real understanding and appreciation, both having lost races before, that at some point this ends. And Scott, when it ends, it's over. When you lose a race, nobody cares. Nobody calls you. No one does stories about you. It's over. And we both know at some point
you write columns though with bad words,
profanity leading the way. But at some point, I mean, we have a desire to be of service and to do good. And I've had other jobs and I hated them. And this is what I want to do. I want to try and make a difference. But we talk a lot about when this is over. It's over. And then someone else will step up and someone else will be on a podcast or whatever that will be at that time. And we have a whole life outside of what we do politically that's really important to us. And we have a whole life beyond politics for things that we want to do later in life. And so I just think it's one of those things where it's, I guess it's interesting. And, we've had other couples. I mean, Greg and Cheryl Cox. And in the legislature, there's been multiple couples that served at the same time, husband and wife in the Assembly and Senate. And so, it's interesting and it's fine. The coverage of it, I understand. But I think in the sense of someone said, oh, it's like an abuse of power. I'm like, what are you talking about, an abuse of power? You have two people who are married, who both care about similar things, who share values, but are doing things. But if we're successful, it doesn't enrich us personally. It just helps other folks.
Well, sorry, did you want to say?
I was going to say, and I think what a lot of people lose, except for those who work with us and work with both of us, is individuals and groups that need help and need empowerment, whether it's veterans or deported veterans or whether it's farm workers or janitors, they're getting twice as much attention and help because we're so passionate about these issues. I got to say, I've always respected veterans. It's been an issue that's great, but I come from an immigrant family. It's not as close to me, but because of hearing every single day about, mental health issues with veterans and the deported veterans issue, it becomes something that I have to work on as well, because it's it's a real problem. Any way I can lend a voice to this or any way I can help with this, I want to help. That happens both. So it's always shocking to me when people are like, oh, it's an abuse of power. No, it's twice as much power, if you will, for often maligned groups or groups that need additional attention or help or just some equity. And I think we're both committed to that. And it's actually been a positive. It's not like we're both like, oh, all right, how do we hook up Chevron? I mean, that would never be a conversation, that either of us would care about. But we'd probably look at each other and think that was crazy. So it's a strange.
I'll give you two examples where it kind of lines up. I mean, one was well before we were married, before we were dating, but it was a janitor's issue where she was involved in this issue, and I frankly wasn't aware of it. I just didn't even know. But I had the relationship with the biotech CEOs, and so she called and said, "Would you meet with them?" I know it's kind of awkward timing with the race and everything, and I met with them, and then I was able to call the CEOs. We were able to get it resolved. The janitors got a better contract. We averted a strike. And then simultaneously, when I got involved in deported veterans, I was able to say, hey, can you help? We need funding in the budget so we can get lawyers to help take care of them and do those types of things. And so, there are those issues and times where it aligns and we, if we both get moving in a direction, thus far, generally speaking, we've been able to find resolution that have benefited janitors or benefited veterans who've come back or, other types of things. And so it's just, that's I think one of the great upsides.
There's the negative take, as we've heard, but then there's also this sort of hyper optimism about what you'll be able to do. I've had several people explain to me now that you've both won re-election or won election, and you're friends with Gavin Newsom, and that there's this axis now that can just pour money down on San Diego. You're the head of the Appropriations Committee. There is an expectation level now that you guys are going to be able to deliver, and how do you consider that in your thinking?
I think we've always delivered, and so
So you're going to hit all the high expectations.
No, I mean, people's expectations, if they're creating them for themselves, may not match up to what we're working on. But I think we both have records of ensuring that we go out and get things done, and we're going to do that. I mean, I'm in a much easier spot in some ways. I'm going back to an assembly with 60, possibly more Democrats, a supermajority in both houses, the opportunity to do some really good stuff. And Nathan has a lot of challenges. I mean, he's going to one forward.
I can caucus by myself.
Yeah, the Dem caucus at the county.
The Dem caucus at the
But
county.
I think we're committed to and this isn't going to happen in a month or 2 months. This is going to be a long-term, as long as we're in the game, if you will.
But I think one thing I think is important is I feel like there's a part of kind of San Diego, this kind of San Diego way, which feels like at times we set low expectations and then cut them in half. And so the notion that we're talking about, doing bigger things or doing bolder things or doing things, to actually make progress in the needle is good. And that's a good conversation. And I think, if you have really high expectations, I may fail on things. Like there will undoubtedly be things that I want to push at the county that I don't have the votes to get. But we're moving it in the right direction. And I think if you look at San Diego, I think there's reason to be optimistic about the next decade. You have the chair of the Assembly Appropriations Committee. We have the president of the Senate from San Diego. We have a governor who has a lot of deep relationships here. We have a county that's beginning to move in a new direction. We're going to get a new mayor in 2020 that's going to take us forward in a new direction. And we have a lot of talent, particularly on the Democratic side, of young, hungry folks who want to do things a little bit differently. And so it would be my hope that, on any given day, you're always going to say, well, that's not quite what we want. But if we look at totality over the next decade, I think we could actually see some real progress. And, it'll never be as quick or as clean or as perfect as folks want. But I think we can kind of break out of a little bit of the funk where, it seems like the most substantive challenge we've addressed as a region in the last 10 years is the Chargers. And we essentially addressed it by failing.
Yeah.
And so, to begin to move those conversations, but I think it's more than just the two of us. I mean, I think there's a lot of folks that are a part of that.
Sure. So politically, as a partnership, you can achieve a lot together. I mean, can you really tell us that you would have done the same as far as donating to the Democratic Party that you did had your husband not been involved in that race?
Well, look, I mean, I donate every election season to the Democratic Party in San Diego. I donate more to the state party. It's expected. And I think my donations there are much larger. And I donated during the runoff when I was fairly certain that the money would not be spent on my husband. Right. I knew that it was a priority race. And what I try to explain to people is there's definitely the personal aspect, right? It's my husband.
You can trust him.
Well, I can trust him. I know his values. I know what he's going to do. I know what he's capable of doing. And that stems also from, don't forget, I've been working on the county for years. We did term limits in order to try to set up a situation where we could get new blood on that board. We know that this county has been out of step with this. The county board has been out of step with the county. From my perspective as a labor advocate, from my perspective as a human advocate, we have been working on this forever. So here's this great opportunity for a real Democrat with good values to get on the board, whether it's my husband or not. That was important to me. Now, I gotta say, the number of times I heard from individuals sitting in the room at the chamber or the Lincoln Club or, any of these kind of Republican groups that said, oh, yeah, people are going to spend money against Nathan because he's your husband. Or they said, we can't let her win. Well, look, if I'm like, you want to challenge me?
I'm grateful to those groups for telling her that.
People would come out and tell me, and I'm like,
that's not the way. Yeah. It doesn't get the reaction you want from my wife.
I was like, you think you're going to win? No. If I know that this is a priority race. I'm going to make sure we win this race because of all the value reasons, because of personal reasons. But then it comes down to, I think we have a very different experience within local San Diego politics. Maybe not so different in some ways, but I have felt this continued pushback from the San Diego 20 and the kind of status quo. And from the day I was elected to head the Labor Council, and I think they were happy when I went away to Sacramento and kind of thought I wouldn't be in their stuff, and then still continued to push an agenda. And I think things need to change. So I'm happy to take that fight on as well as if they were fighting me directly. So
you're saying that their threats to spend money against him motivated you to support him?
Well, yeah.
Well, people straight out told her, like, yeah, we're going to spend money against him to punish you. I mean, there was just a level of absurdity to so much of what happened that I was like, oh, I don't think that's going to get
They didn't tell me, but other people in the room were very clear that was discussed.
Does it happen the other way? Do people ever call you if they're mad at her?
Oh, my God, all the time. And, but here's the difference, though, and this I think is an important point, is there is an underlying sexism that just exists across the board in society. And you see it in the sense of she's in the assembly and people come up and say, well, who's watching the kids? But when I was in the assembly, no one ever asked me one time who's watching the kids. Or we'll go to dinner with folks and it's, maybe been people that I've known for years. And invariably the first question they ask her is, I go, so where'd you go to school? And I stop them and I'm like, hey, you've known me for 15 years. You never asked me where I went to school. Why is that the first thing you ask her? Because she's a woman of color. She has to prove she belongs. And I'm like, okay, baby, tell them. And people will call me all the time and say, you need to tell your wife to do this. And I'm like, I start laughing. I'm like, yeah, why don't you tell her?
Who's told you that?
A number of people have told me. It happens all the time. I get the call and they're like, I had one person who will go unnamed who goes, you need to get your woman in line. And I'm like, man, that's blatantly sexist, but B, that's not how our relationship works. Like, she is a strong, bold, independent woman who's fully capable of making her own decisions. And so, I mean, there was one time and an occasion where literally I took someone's phone, dialed their number, set it on the table and left. I'm like, you call her. Like, I don't tell her what to do. And so I think there's a disparity in, people will say, well, tell her to do this or tell her to do that or get her to this. And I'm like, but that's not how our relationship works and not how our marriage works. That's just not how it is. Versus, I don't think anyone's ever called you and said, tell your husband to do this. It's, it's just a different,
to be fair, you haven't had much power lately.
That's true. That's true.
No, but I don't anticipate they would. That would be an odd, you need to tell your husband. It just doesn't come across. People don't do that. They've asked, like, can you bring your husband to this? That's the most I've ever gotten. It is a definite, I think when we're together, we realize how people treat us individually, and it's very clear, and something, of course, my whole life, being a woman of color, you're kind of used to it. Like, okay, I got to prove myself. I've got to do twice as much to be seen as half as good. But there is a certain situation, and I kind of love it because, of course, Nathan will always tell me what people say, and it's enlightening. You realize people who are willing to deal with me, directly, and people who are too afraid to come and ask me to do something or to stop doing something.
Yeah, and I also tell people too. There's just so many. I just think so many times people approach things wrong. Especially and I think some of the smarter calls I've gotten is someone said, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. Like, what would you suggest? And I said, well, there was one issue that came up, and I just told them, I said, look, I'm not involved, I'm not lobbying, I'm not negotiating. I said, my wife is incredibly brilliant and smart, and you should go sit down and make a factual, logical case for what your position is with none of this BS kind of talking points thing. I said, but if you go at her and you think you're going to threaten her, you're going to intimidate her, I said, none of that stuff works. I mean, that may work for other members of the legislature, but it doesn't work with her. Whatever you do, she'll do worse to you coming back. I said, but go sit down and make a factual, intellectually honest argument for your position in a very real way. In that instance, they did, and it worked out. And so I think, a lot of times people are just kind of trying to figure it out.
Let's switch. We've got a lot of politics and public affairs fans here. I wanted to ask about a few things. So you mentioned you're going into the assembly with a supermajority, unlike we've seen in decades. There is one race that's still undecided. Brian Mainshine is holding tenuously to that seat at the 77th district. Is that your old seat, or is it right next to it?
Well, it's so my old seat came further down south. So my seat had a La Jolla, some more Democratic areas, and it was interesting because when it got drawn, and they basically moved the new seat up. So the portions where I lived and represented, a lot of that went into Tony Atkins, what is now Todd Gloria's seat. So when it was moved, I thought, well, that's going to be a safe Republican seat forever because of geographically where it was moved to, which isn't the case.
So Mainshine is he's kind of in a similar place, very moderate considering. He has a lot of friends, Tony Atkins. I actually got some people who called me and said that they were a little worried and upset about your not really rallying the troops against him, raising money, and that had you and everybody else been in line against him, they might have been able to get over that hump. It's not clear that they haven't, but is that true? Did you kind of hold your fire?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was really honest that I wasn't going to endorse against him. I think Sunday is a fine woman, a fine individual who would make a great legislator. But the reality is this: I have a good friendship with Brian Mainshine, and when I need somebody who will listen to my argument and possibly cross the line and make a really tough vote, I knew I could go to Brian. And so I could give you 5, probably 10 examples when, I'm not interested in a scorecard vote. I'm not interested in things that, is just you vote with your caucus. I'm interested in when I have a bill for women that's being called a job killer by the chamber that no Republican would touch, and that a group of moderate Democrats won't touch. And I can convince Brian Mainshine to be my 41st vote. That happened time and time again. And so to a certain extent, I think, and I lobbied him heavily and with a number of other people to get his vote on the housing bond, to get his vote on the Tony Atkins piece of legislation. I had a number of Me Too bills that he was the 41st vote. And we've had such a good working relationship that I just didn't think it was fair after all those times of going to him on votes, on tough votes, and him being there to rally the troops against him. He's, I just don't think that would be very intellectually honest of me.
Is there any scenario where it's worse for you in the assembly if he is replaced by a Democrat?
Well, look, I don't think so, but I've seen a lot of Democrats who come in to take Republican seats. We've seen this happen a lot in my tenure, and they're very they're afraid of those tough votes. A lot of times we're struggling to get to 41 on tough economic issues because Democrats who feel like they're in a vulnerable position can't go up on it. And so in some ways, I mean, I haven't gone through the list. Sunday has said, of course, she should be good on all these labor issues and women's issues, the things that really motivate me. I hope she would. I think she would. I just didn't think it'd be completely disingenuous if I went after Brian just simply for being a Republican, not because of how I've had my interactions with him and how he's voted.
Nathan, do you think that's why he's in trouble, because he's a Republican? Is there any other thing that he's done wrong to lose that seat?
Well, I don't know. I mean, look, I mean, the Republican Party's dying in California, and it's dying because as a brand and as a statement of values, it's just out of line with the majority of the voters in the majority of the districts in California. And so there has to come a point, which I've certainly lived through, which is where you have to say, do my values line up with what this party has become? Not what do I want this party to be, but what this party has become. And so I think every Republican has to assess for themselves. At the end of the day, it is the Trump party. And, you can say, well, that's not me. Well, okay, but that's still the party you're affiliated with. And that's still the entity and the organization. And that's the way that voters view it. And, I think that there's times where individual Republicans or Democrats can, clearly do better than their party brand because they have an independent brand and enough people recognize that and they have relationships and they've done things to step out away from that. And those are the folks that survive. And then there's times where there's just nothing you can do. You're affiliated with something and you chose to remain affiliated with something that is so toxic that there comes a point where you own it. And that's where you are, and you made a choice to stay there. And, you always have a choice. You can leave.
I think that's true. And I think it's really hard right now with as much respect and as I have for Brian and him being a friend, and I know his daughters, and I like him as a person. I could have never supported him for the simple reason that he remains in the party of Trump. And so there is a difference between not being involved in a race because you have respect for somebody and wanting to be respectful of that. But I think right now it's really tough to look at any Republican and say, how can you stay? I mean, given your person, especially one you know well, right? You know their values and you know that they're good people and have decent beliefs, and like, how do you stay?
Okay, so is there a place in the Democratic Party for a Brian Mainshine that's the exact copy, principle-wise and policy-wise, that he is? Does he fit in that coalition?
I think he does. I think he is actually, from my experience with him, and I mean, look, I think he's probably just similar to a moderate Democrat.
You were shaking your head.
No, I don't know. I mean, everyone's got to assess that for themselves. I didn't serve with them. I haven't.
I guess I've been rather obsessed with this point about like, what if Lori Zaff, Brian Mainshine, if everybody's going to fail in large part because of their association with Trump in this region at least, then what is the future of that sort of more centrist or even center right person? Is there no value in actually having somebody representing those principles and stuff in a way that is at all successful? Or is this just an intra-party Democratic dispute? And in that situation, is it okay for somebody like that to be in the party?
Well, I guess what I would say in that is in a democracy, someone has to make that case to the voters. I mean, ultimately it's a market. I mean, it's not like 5 of us get in a room and decide. I mean, they have to go out and make the case. And so if somebody, I made the case in this campaign, in my campaign, that we needed a Democrat. County needed to go in a more progressive direction. We laid out a series of values and positions, and you make your case to the voters, and the voters respond and react to that. And so ultimately, I think time will tell in terms of people's ability to articulate. What I would say, though, for every candidate, though, is you got to get in the fight. I mean, you got to get out there and you got to make your case. And I think what you see a lot of times is, in the case of Lori Zaff or someone else, they're kind of tiptoeing around, and it's just not, on some of these defining issues of our time, you have to take a position. And I think, to your point, what you see across the country, whether it's the Jeff Flakes of the world or the guy in Tennessee or others, is they just came to the assessment that, they couldn't survive that run. But I don't know that we've seen people really, put forward the effort.
And I think from my perspective and the Democratic Party in general, I think there's plenty of room for principled moderates. What I don't want to see is everybody becoming a Democrat and just, or Republican or whatever, and selling out, quite frankly, and I think that my concern always is like, are you a principled person? I have more respect, I have to say, and this is not going to be popular on my side, but I can have a conversation with a Brian Jones about his beliefs on abortion. I can disagree with those, but I know he fundamentally believes that, life begins at conception and that there's just nothing past that. So we can disagree about where we come out on that, but he believes that. He's not voting this way because his constituents think he should, right? And there's a certain respect because I believe strongly in my principles, right? I think that we're going to have some different principles in the United States, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, some core beliefs that we can disagree, but doesn't make you a bad person. And it's important to disagree so you can have those discussions about principles and values and not hate each other over it, right? So you can have and understand that people come from different places and they have different backgrounds. But what is core is, are you abiding by your own principles and your beliefs? And are you doing it for the right reasons? And what I don't want to see, a lot of my frustration comes like, don't just fold into business. Don't tell me you care about workers and you care about people and you want people to be self-sufficient, but the minute the chamber's in your office, you fold.
Yeah.
That to me is what I don't want to see in either party. A disingenuousness that just doesn't help.
Well, and that was frustrating. I mean, going back to my time in the Assembly, to that same point, I never cared if somebody said, no, I can't vote for this because I just don't think it's right. Right. And they could say, I think you're a good person. I just don't think this is right. Okay, I can deal with that. And I think that there's space in parties for people who genuinely just say, look, I just don't believe that that's the right thing to do. What is frustrating is when someone says, well, yeah, we should do that, but I got this group or I got that group or that, and that I think is the frustrating part is there's, at times a kind of a lack of political courage.
Well, they're operating out of fear is what you're describing.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, so one of the county party, to some extent, labor unions were out of step in some ways with some of the other races in the county. In District 8, it looks like Vivian Moreno's held on to a win there. She didn't have the support of the party. Monica Montgomery in District 8, you were torn a little bit about. I'm sorry, District 4. Yeah. And what do you think? Is there anything wrong with the Democratic Party and the infrastructure, and or is it just the way of the market?
Well, I think there's a lot of misperceptions about how the Democratic Party makes decisions, and I think that there's just a lot. You have folks who got elected on the ballot, right? They were elected to the Democratic Party Central Committee, and there's a finite group of them, and they're activists, and they're true believers, and they care about the party, and they care about progressive values. And there is a long, exhaustive process the party goes through when it makes its endorsement recommendation. And it's not a situation where the chair of the party says, I thereby bless you with the endorsement, or it's not a situation where the elected officials do that. I mean, this is an activist-driven organization. And so the candidates who care enough about the party to go out and spend the time and communicate what they're doing and answer the questions and respect the party process tend to be the ones that come out with the endorsement. And sometimes it's close and sometimes it's contentious and it's not. But it's not a situation where there's like two people who just decide. Like that's just not how the Democratic Party works. And so I think at times, they get some right, they get some wrong. Sometimes there's allegiances and there's relationships and there's things that have been built up over time. And then, sometimes there's campaigns and entities that just work harder at that, and other campaigns work on other things.
And I think with labor in particular, which I understand the way they make their decisions, and there's a sense of loyalty. I was really, it was tough. District 4 was tough for me because I love Monica. I thought she was great. I think she's great. She's going to do great things. And I understood the frustration in the community about what they thought was missing. And so seeing it up close, I mean, our part of that is my district. I understood that. I also understand why labor stood by Myrtle. When we needed a candidate for District 4 in the special election, same time I ran, we basically convinced Myrtle to leave a good job in labor, paying more, probably fewer hours, a good organizing job, but, to run for city council. And so, she kind of strayed a little bit, but then they got her to kind of come back to her roots. And so they're going to be loyal. I mean, there's a certain sense of, yes, we know we originally asked you to run. We put you there. We kind of let you flounder a little, and then we worked with you to continue this. Of course, they're going to support her. I don't think, to me, when people said, well, how could they do that? Why aren't they listening to community? Well, they have their reasons as well. And guess what? It was the right decision to ask her to run for District 4 the first time. And given the people we had running and what we could do. And so I think that was a good decision. On District 8, Vivian has a history with labor, and it wasn't necessarily not a history, maybe a lack of one, if you will, but there have always been some tensions with that office and labor. So of course they're going to seek out somebody who is seeking them out, and so that wasn't happening with Vivian. She wasn't, I'm pretty sure she never showed up to a picket line, and she didn't, come to events and try to learn more about the worker issues. So of course they're going to go with somebody who's trying really hard to do that in those situations. And so it happens. They're not always going to choose right. I think they did extremely well. The party did fabulous, and labor did as well, I think, across the board. But there's always going to be some high profile races that they choose differently.
Do you dislike Vivian Moreno?
I don't know her well enough to like or dislike her. I'm agnostic. I have not always had. I have to say, and I'm really honest about it. I have a long relationship with not a great relationship with that office. Starting from when I was at labor and we didn't support David Alvarez. But what people didn't get is there was one question that made us not support David Alvarez. When we asked him, we were in the middle of a fight. It's kind of like now where something was coming up before the council, but it had to have a second reading, and we knew he'd have to vote on it. And it had to do with whether or not you'd consider job quality in siting a hotel. It was a proposal that was put up by Ben Wesso, who is going to be replaced. And so every candidate that came on, of course, we asked that question. And he said, no, I wouldn't support it. Okay, when you're looking at a policy consideration that is our most important policy consideration. So, of course, we didn't support him. And then he got on the council and he didn't support it. And so, and I get that, like there's a price you pay, but it was very clear that he was willing to vote that way, despite the fact that almost every single worker that would be in those hotels whose job quality we're looking at lives in his district. And so it's a little like, come on. We need to do better than this. And then I think our relationships got better and we did better, but we never had a very close working relationship when it came to working people in the District 8 City Council seat. I hope that changes, but that takes a very proactive approach. I think whoever sits in that seat has a responsibility to the workers who live in District 8, who are largely in the tourism sector, who are largely in the service sector in general, and that you cannot serve that area, just like you can't serve my assembly district without serving the needs of workers who are predominantly low wage, who don't have health care, sometimes don't have health care, who don't right now have housing, and that be your main focus. It's just a ideological bent that I have on representing that area.
So one of the things I've been trying to track is this is a now gigantic Democratic dominated area. I mean, there's a super majority on the council. Obviously, the county, not yet, but it sure feels like within 4 to 10 years, that's going to flip over. And so it doesn't feel like politics is going to get easier, though. In many cases, as these races are actually fiercer in some cases.
Sure.
And so I've been trying to identify where those like lines might break down, and it feels like in some cases, housing and building housing is an area where it might cause a cleave. In District 8. There was a divide about rent control. There was a divide about, Vivian Moreno was very clear. She wanted to see a ton of housing being built. And I think that's an interesting, would you agree that there's a potential divide among Democrats about the ease of building versus gentrification and protectionism and stuff like that?
Well, taking gentrification out, I think that's more of a north-south Democratic divide, if you will. Like, I don't know many South Bay elected officials who aren't into high-density housing. Right. Like we have such a need. Let's do it. Right. Let's build it. Also, because most of the available building is transit-oriented around development, high density. We're for that. So, but
yeah, but I think in areas that overlap districts that are bigger, it does. It becomes an issue, and some of it is. Some of it is ideological, and some of it's just candidates that are playing populist politics, and that type of thing. And I think as we move, one of the things that I think is going to be interesting to watch is as we come out of this kind of sleepy Navy town and really embrace being a dynamic, vibrant urban core. Well, if we're going to do that, then we have to do things that other urban cities and counties do, and that's density, and that's transit, and that's real action on environmental progress. And so, I think the speed and scope and how far you go, will certainly be a divide.
I think another area that's really interesting to watch is education and the politics of schools. And we see in District 4, Shirley Weber, obviously she's on the Assembly, Monica Montgomery, they have a fierce independent streak, it feels like, on education. Then there's this big push, it feels like growing push for a moratorium on charter schools. Tony Thurmond, you supported Tony Thurmond for superintendent of public education, public instruction. Yeah. He wants a moratorium on charter schools. You both have kids in High Tech High, a charter school. How do you feel about the charter school discussion and about education progress and reform?
Well, I think sometimes it's not. One of the problems in education is we just evolve into these overly simplistic solutions. And so people have, you have the anti-tenure folks who are like, well, if we just get rid of tenure, everything will be fine. But then you go to states who don't have tenure and their test scores are no better. So is it that? And you devolve into these little tribes. And I always think, or we had this huge fight on like district elections. Well, I support district elections. I support the Voting Rights Act. I support the intent of it. So I can't say that we should have district elections, but then say, well, that doesn't make sense on the school board. I think that sense. I don't philosophically support term limits. I live in an environment where they exist, but I wouldn't propose them. And so, sometimes there's other factors at play.
You got your seat because of them.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, benefit from it, but you can benefit from things that you wouldn't have proposed on yourself. But I think, for me, when it comes to charter schools, I think charter schools serve a valuable function if we understand what the function is. And the function of charter schools is to try things, to assess things, to test things, to figure out what works, and then apply those lessons system-wide. And so I think that there is a role for charter schools consistent with that mission. But I don't believe that charter schools exist to be a competitor to take kids out of traditional public schools. The overwhelming majority of our kids will always be in your non-charter traditional public schools. And so we have to learn the lessons of what works best and apply that system-wide. And so, again, you have this notion of folks who, some it's tenure, some it's charter. Well, if we just had all charter schools, well, the charter school test scores are not any better. Right? So that can't be the single solution. And so why don't we talk about the things that actually work? And that's, a high quality pre-K education, early childhood education, making sure kids have breakfast and lunch, making sure we have after school programs, making sure we have summer programs so kids don't regress. There's things that we know will actually work, but it's just easier to devolve to a point of like, we're going to oversimplify this and then we're going to get people in their corners and we're going to make it ideological.
Yeah. And I think for me in particular, it was a difficult decision. I've had our kids are Explorer and High Tech High. Tiara went to Explorer and High Tech Middle and then went to Pacific Beach and Mission Bay. So we've had them in every school. And, I'm an advocate for teachers' unions. I think that there is a place for the union in education for teachers, for instructors, for the noon duty lady. Everybody deserves the right to a voice in the workplace. And I think that's really important. My frustration with charter schools have been this idea that they have to be anti-union. And they don't. You have charter schools up and down the state that are functioning under union contracts. Like Nathan, we really believe in this kind of experimental learning because not one size doesn't fit all. And I say that at the same time as I pass a bunch of bills and vote for a bunch of bills that are one size fits all. And so it's kind of this conflict because you want some basics covered, but you also want things to continue to change and different approaches used and different types. If I explain to you my son's last semester last year, where he spent most of the time literally at the Colorado River and the Salton Sea and studying in every aspect water in ninth grade. It was amazing. All right. It was the most amazing kind of production we've seen. They did a big movie about it. I can link it to my Facebook. It's really cool. But then this year I'm struggling with, he missed a semester of really structured math. And so how do you catch up on that? And these are some of the challenges that they haven't worked out, And so we're lucky enough that we can go get a tutor and help with that so that he's not a disadvantage when he checks the SAT. But, that doesn't work for everybody. So if we're going to admit the great things about some of these charter schools, we have to admit the failures of these charter schools as well. And my concerns are this. It's still a public school. They should be held publicly accountable, that in the same way that we expect our normal public schools to operate. They should be conflict-free. They should be open and transparent. They should take their percentage of hard-to-teach children, and provide the same sort of support that traditional public schools do and not be able to kind of take the cream of the crop. So there are some things that I support. And I think what's happening in California and why I support Tony Thurman's position on this is maybe we've grown too quick in the charter school aspect in California, and we're not making those demands of individual schools. So a majority of the charter schools in my district that are actually in my district, I've gone to a lot of them. Some of them I would never allow my child to go to. It's a disservice. If the only thing your charter school does is convince kids to go because you're giving them an iPad, that's a disservice. And a lot of families, of course, they think that's exciting and maybe there's language barriers or they're not really sure what they're not getting or don't know what their expectations should be, but their kid got an iPad and that's success. Well, we have a responsibility as a state to step in and say some of these schools should not be functioning. And I support that as well.
So you do support a moratorium?
I support a temporary moratorium till we figure out where things are. I think we can't just continue to charter new charter schools without kind of cleaning up what's happened in the explosion.
And one of the other things you achieved last year or 2 years ago was the passage of 805, changed the makeup of Sandag. Now we are seeing the mayor of Escondido fell to a Democrat.
A beautiful thing.
Sam Abed's been replaced now.
There is a God.
Paul McNamara. There is a change in National City. There's a little bit of a change in La Mesa. Tremendous, which all could have eventual impacts. Georgette Gomez, if she becomes council president, could get on Sandag. Sandag could be a really different place. What exactly do you think changes about on the ground life in San Diego because of that?
Well, I always take Sandag with MTS because I know they're separate, but they're the same. And not Sandag does much more, but it's important to me. And I just want to point out that AB 805 was probably one of those things that my husband got a lot of phone calls about. I'm going to guess.
I thought it was great.
But I think that we have an opportunity to really invest in transit. And I think that that's hugely important. We have an opportunity to do high-density housing near transit and to really invest in a way that makes it a part of life. So the problem with San Diego is you're never going to achieve, and it's not, some people think, oh, transit, that's cute, whatever. We will never reach our climate goals unless we have more people who are willing to get out of their cars and get on the bus or the trolley. We will never do it without reducing tailpipe emissions. There are not enough electric cars available and enough people able to purchase them. So we have to figure out how we get more people into public transit. And it's a quality of life thing. So I was really coming from that perspective. I happen to represent a community that uses public transit. So it's not just a good environmental thing, but it's a necessity. They don't have a car, or they need that to be able to, maybe they have one car for the entire family. And so I knew under the old model of Sandag and MTS that we were never going to make the kind of investments we needed. If nothing, it was continuing to be cut back. We were fighting for things like youth bus passes, which I think are extremely important, things that we're just getting nowhere on. And yet this is not just, again, a need for my community, but it's a global need for us to be able to reach the kind of cutting greenhouse gases the way we need to. So I'm excited.
But I think that thing too. I mean, if you look at the structure of it prior, if we believe in the basic concept of one person, one vote, which outside of the Electoral College and the U.S. Senate is a cornerstone of our American democracy, it didn't make sense. I mean, it literally, from a population standpoint, did not make sense. I mean, if we were going to govern the state or the country the way that Sandag had been governed previously, then Del Mar would get one member of Congress and the entire city of San Diego would get one member of Congress. But that doesn't make sense because it's just inconsistent with the basic principle. And I think that the change that we're seeing across San Diego was really masked in a lot of ways by some of these entities. It was masked by a city council where you could win in June, or a mayor's race where you could win in June, or a supervisor's race where you could win in June.
That it allowed Republicans to punch above
the demographic weight of the market. I mean, the party that was all for markets and competition would then create these things that manipulate the market to ensure that they could preserve power because they couldn't compete in the full marketplace of voters. And I think that's a change. But I also think that there's a change that's coming as well. I mean, at the end of the day, when you make laws and you make policy and you do these types of things, it's not a continuum. It's not like there's just like we can't do everything. And so often we would kind of, we would do these things and say, well, we're doing transit, well, no, we weren't. I mean, we were doing a little bit of transit at the back end and we were doing a lot of roads. And I think now we're going to get to a point where we say no. I mean, it's money, power, influence, and rights. It's a pie, And so somebody asked me, in my campaign, they said, so what you're saying is you want to spend less money on roads and more money on transit. I said, that's exactly what I'm saying. And I want to have more bike paths, which means we're going to have fewer street parking. And I don't want to do backcountry, fire-prone development in areas that don't make sense. I want to do more infill. Now, that's going to require me to come out and support things that may be a little controversial because they're infill and their density in areas that maybe don't want it. Or it's going to force me to confront the store owner who says, but I want that street parking, or it's going to force me. But I think those are the types of things that we need to have. And I think we should just be honest about, like, we're making choices about the future of our city and our region, and it's not going to satisfy everyone.
Well, I'm going to have to let you go soon, I'm sure, but I really appreciate you taking the time on this stuff. Have you met with Kristen Gaspar at the county?
I have not yet. Her office has reached out, and we're trying to schedule something. So
they're not going to vote to put you on Sanday.
I would be my guess now.
What other things, though, do you hope to be immediately on? There's a big discussion right now about mental health. Sure. Is that something you're going to be able to influence?
Well, mental health, I think when you look at the contours of my district, and when you look at the issues I focused on and talked a lot about in the campaign, it was a lot of those types of issues. And so I think that there's an opportunity to really begin to drive some solutions around inpatient psychiatric beds, about recuperative care centers. I think that there's more we can do in terms of county-owned land and county-owned resources, and in terms of an actual investment in things that tackle the mental health, the homeless, the housing crisis. And I think that there's opportunities to begin to actually make some progress there. And I'll just tell you, I mean, I showed up at the county at 9 a.m. Thursday after the election and started having meetings. And I have to tell you, thus far, I've met a lot of people that are a part of that organization in very senior positions who said, look, we know we need to do more, and we want to do more. And we need a supervisor who's going to push these ideas and push these things. Now, that doesn't mean that everything that I want to do, we're just going to magically will happen. But I think that there's a lot of folks who went to work at the county because they want to serve the public and they want to do good. And they've been waiting for someone to kind of be that voice and push. And I've had great conversations with Greg Cox. I think there's a lot of areas where, we're perhaps aligned. I've had good conversations with Jim Desmond, Diane Jacob. We had a very productive conversation about some areas where we may align. And I look forward to meeting with Kristen Gaspar and figuring out some areas there. And so I think that there's an opportunity, and I believe that we can begin to make some changes. It's just instantly going to be what I want? No, because there's 5 votes and I'm one of 5. But I think we start heading in the right direction.
And you'll be running for mayor.
No. So here's what I want, though. Here's what I want. I want everyone who has continued to say this over and over and over again when the filing deadline for that race passes to come out and say, well, they were wrong. He actually was telling the truth.
And you're not running for mayor.
No.
All right.
I am not running for mayor.
So that established.
Neither one of us.
Do either of you have a preference yet in who should be the mayor of San Diego in 2020?
I will guarantee that I will not support a Republican.
Okay.
I can't imagine one coming forward that I could support. We have a embarrassment of riches right now in the candidates. And so I have a long history with Scott Peters, who I have seen his most progressive side and seen how effective he can be at helping workers, the environment, some things I've gotten to work on with him over the years. I really love him. I've been friends with Todd since we were kids, basically. And, we kind of grew up as staffers together, and I served with him in the legislature. He's a true blue progressive, and I think really has some cool ideas. I know Barbara Bree less, but I've gotten to know her, and she's bold and a woman and take charge. And I like that as well. So I think we'll have to watch and see how these things play out. And who knows if somebody else jumps in. It won't be either of us, that's for sure. I don't think either of us anticipate a big 2020 election. I'll run for re-election, and that's about it. And so we will, I think, individually and together make some decisions on the mayor's race. We don't always agree. I don't know if we will on this. I think we
didn't agree in the governor's race.
Whatever. In the runoff, we did. In the general election, we agreed. But we discuss this often about how much we love these candidates, and that really is going to be tough.
And the field can take shape.
Are they calling you yet?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you haven't decided either?
No, I haven't. And part of it too is having been through this myself, the field changes.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always, if you go back to any mayor's race, there's a group of folks who talk about it. At times, there's a group of folks who start it. And so, I think we should just give it some time.
But I think you brought up about things changing, right? Because we have all these Democrats now. We're seeing it in the South Bay a lot. People kind of angling, like who's going to run for supervisor and who's looking at Ben Wesso's seat when he's out and who's looking at my seat and who's, because we have young, mainly Latinos who haven't had this opportunity before to suddenly feel very empowered, and it's great. And it gets tougher and tougher as somebody who's been kind of in this business for a little bit, both as an advocate and an elected official, because these are people that we've had personal relationships with. When you look at a field and you're like, every single one of these people like stood up hard for me. They have good values. I know they would be good at this job, and you have to choose between your friends. That gets to be difficult. And we're not the kind of Democratic city like Los Angeles or San Francisco where you have these true like factions. Like, of course, I'm going to support this person because they're from my political family. People kind of try to make that up, but that doesn't really exist in San Diego. And so it's going to be some tough discussions, I think, for a lot of Democrats coming in the next few years.
Doesn't exist yet.
I think that's a fair point. No, I think that's right. I think over time, tribes will kind of happen, and that will happen. But
will you be at the head of one?
No.
Maybe.
We love everybody. Being a mom, I realize that, you got to love all your kids the same.
Well, I think I could keep talking for a while, but I really appreciate you taking the time. Lorena Gonzalez and Fletcher and Nathan.
Thank you. Good to be with you.